Dahlia Prentiss was 27 years old, sitting in the cramped back office of her parents' Nashville estate, when she fully understood that her family had never seen her as a person. They had seen her as a contingency plan. The debt her father owed the Marin Group was $4.2 million. She would learn that number soon enough, the exact figure that Howard Prentiss had borrowed to prop up his collapsing construction company, and the exact figure for which he would trade his eldest daughter without a moment's hesitation. Howard Prentiss had built his reputation the way most men in Nashville's development circuit built theirs. On the appearance of success rather than the substance of it, he kept a box at Bridgestone Arena. He threw charity galas at the Omni. His wife, Vivienne, wore pearls to Sunday brunch and smiled at the right people, and had never, not once in 27 years, defended Dahlia when the word fat was spoken under her own roof. And it was spoken often. Dahlia was not the daughter the Prentiss family photographed. She was the one who reviewed the quarterly reports and flagged the discrepancies that no one else bothered to find. She had a degree in forensic accounting from Vanderbilt, earned on a scholarship, because Howard had spent her college fund on a spec development in Murfreesboro that went underwater before the foundation was poured. She wore oversized blazers she hoped would hide the width of her hips. She had learned very early that making herself useful was the only currency her family accepted from a body like hers. But usefulness meant nothing when a man's empire was built on borrowed time and other people's money. The collapse came fast, the way all slow rot eventually does. The Brentwood mixed-use project had been bleeding cash for 18 months. Howard had stopped answering calls from Chase and First Tennessee 2 quarters ago. What Dahlia didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was where he had turned when the legitimate lenders stopped picking up. She knew the moment Laszlo Marin walked through the front door. It was a Wednesday night in February, and sleet was cutting sideways across the windows when the front door swung open without a knock. 3 men in dark wool coats moved through the foyer like they owned it, because in every way that mattered financially, they did. Dahlia had been in the study reviewing a miserable set of receivables reports when she heard them. She moved quietly into the hallway, pressed herself into the shadow of the doorframe, and watched. Laszlo Marin was not what she expected from a man whose name her father had never spoken above a whisper. He was tall in the way that consumed a room rather than simply occupied it, broad-shouldered, unhurried, with dark eyes that catalogued everything and revealed nothing. He moved like someone who had never once needed to rush, because the outcome of every room he entered had already been decided. He stopped at the center of the study and looked at Howard the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. 4.2 million, Howard. His voice was low and even, with the faint trace of something Eastern European worn smooth over decades in American cities. The extension I gave you in December was a courtesy. Tonight is not a courtesy call. Howard Prentiss, who could reduce a room full of contractors to silence, gripped the edge of his desk with both hands and looked like a man standing on ice that was already cracking beneath him. Laszlo, the Brentwood deal is going to close 6 more weeks. I have assets, the lake house, the Franklin property. I don't want your weekend toys. Laszlo didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You leveraged your company and your name for my capital. Both are now mine until the debt is settled. Howard's eyes moved, fast, desperate, scanning, and then they landed on Dahlia. She watched the exact moment her father made the calculation. It was instantaneous and bloodless, the way only a certain kind of cowardice can be. "Take her," he pointed. His hand was trembling. "My daughter. She's smart. Forensic accounting, she can work, she knows how to handle numbers. Just take her as collateral until I have the funds. Just take her instead." The room went still. Sleet hit the windows. One of Laszlo's men shifted almost imperceptibly, and then Laszlo turned his head and looked directly at Dahlia. She was standing in the shadow of the doorway in her grey cardigan and flat shoes, her dark hair pulled back in the hasty knot she wore when she worked late, her face flushing with a particular kind of humiliation that has no name because no language ever expected a father to cause it. She braced for it. The laugh, the dismissal, the look her mother always wore in photographs when Dahlia was somewhere in the frame, that quiet desperation of someone trying to crop out a mistake. Instead, Laszlo studied her for 3 full seconds. Then he spoke. "Pack a bag." He said it to her, not to Howard. "You have 10 minutes." The drive was 45 minutes of silence and controlled terror. Dahlia sat in the back of the SUV, with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, trying to steady her breathing. Laszlo sat beside her with the stillness of a man who had nothing to prove and no need to fill silence. She ran through scenarios in her head. A warehouse, a basement, somewhere cold and industrial, and far from anyone who might notice she was gone. They turned off the highway eventually, climbing a wooded road into the hills southeast of the city. Iron gates appeared in the headlights, swung open silently, and the SUV followed a long gravel drive up to a stone house that looked less like a criminal's compound and more like something from the pages of a magazine you found only in certain waiting rooms. Warm light in the windows. A stand of mature oaks along the eastern ridge. A woman named Mrs. Aldana was waiting in the foyer, small, silver-haired, with the precise posture of someone who had survived the company of difficult men by being indispensable to them. She looked at Dahlia without assessment of any kind. "Miss Prentiss," she said, "I'll show you to your room." Dahlia looked at Laszlo. "You're not going to lock me somewhere, put me to work tonight?" He had been handing his coat to one of his men. He paused, turned, and looked at her with the same measured steadiness that seemed to be his default setting regardless of context. "You are collateral," he said, "which means you are my responsibility until your father's debt is cleared. You're not a prisoner, and you're not a maid. Tonight you sleep." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, then walked away down a long corridor. The room was enormous and warm, a fireplace already lit, windows overlooking a dark valley of winter trees. The ensuite had a deep soaking tub and towels folded with the care of someone who had thought seriously about comfort. When the door clicked shut behind Miss Aldana, Dahlia sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her face into her hands and cried, not from fear, not really, but from the particular grief of being treated more gently by a stranger who had just purchased her existence than her own parents had managed in 27 years. She cried for a long time. Then she washed her face, and when she opened the closet looking for somewhere to hang her bag, she found it stocked. Not with shapeless, punishing things, with real clothes, wide-leg trousers, structured blazers, silk blouse in deep jewel tones, all in her exact size. Not approximate, her exact measurements, though someone had done the research quietly and without ceremony. Dahlia stood in front of the open closet with her hand resting on the sleeve of a forest green jacket, and something shifted in her chest that she couldn't quite name yet. The next morning she followed the smell of coffee to a home office that looked like a serious person's working space, bookshelves floor to ceiling, multiple monitors, a long glass desk covered in financial documents. Laszlo was on the phone when she appeared in the doorway, speaking low and rapid in what sounded like Hungarian. He ended the call when he saw her and gestured to the chair across the desk. "Your father's company doesn't just owe my organization money," he said, sliding a folder toward her. "Open it." She did, and the numbers began speaking to her the way numbers always did, clearly, precisely, without the evasions that people used. 3 LLCs registered in Delaware. All 3 listed her as the sole managing member. She had never heard of any number appeared on tax documents she had never signed and loan agreements she had never seen. Millions in fraudulent debt, misappropriated capital, unpaid tax liabilities. A chain of wire transfers that looked, on paper, like she had been the architect of her father's entire financial fraud. "He made you the guarantor," Laszlo said. "If the IRS or the DOJ ever opens the Prentiss accounts, Howard and your brother walk out clean. You spend the next decade defending yourself in federal court." Dahlia set the folder down. Her brother Finn, charming, careless, beloved Finn, who had never read a financial document in his life, appeared in the underlying transactions as a beneficiary, never as a liability, of course. "Why are you showing me this?" Her voice was steady in the way that voices get when the shock has gone too deep for tears. "I'm your collateral. Why does it matter to you whether my father framed me?" Laszlo stood and walked around the desk. He stopped close to her, not threateningly, but near enough that she had to look up. "Because I don't work with men who throw the people under their care into the fire to save themselves." He said it without drama, the way someone states a policy rather than a sentiment. "Your father is a coward, you are not. And you are the most valuable asset in this situation right now. You can read every document in that folder and understand exactly what he built and exactly how to take it apart." He held her gaze. "I want you to help me dismantle Howard Prentiss's business down to the studs. In exchange, I'll make sure that when the federal investigation comes, and it will, your name is not on a single indictment." Dahlia considered him. "You need me," she said. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." There was something clarifying about being needed for the right thing. She started that afternoon. For 3 weeks, the office became her world. Laszlo gave her access to his financial intelligence team's analysis, and she gave them the kind of forensic precision that had gone entirely unappreciated at the Prentiss family table. She traced shell companies through 4 layers of Delaware incorporations. She cross-referenced transfer dates against Finn's credit card statements, which Laszlo's team had obtained through methods she decided not to examine too closely. She drank Mrs. Aldana's coffee and worked until the valley outside went from dark to gray to the pale gold of a Tennessee winter morning, and she did not feel invisible once. She noticed Laszlo the way she noticed everything, carefully, despite herself. He checked on her in the evenings, setting food beside her keyboard without comment when she forgot to eat. He corrected his team when they interrupted her mid-analysis. Once, when she called a particularly tangled transfer structure amateur hour, he laughed, a short, real sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. He never once looked at her body with contempt. Not with performative tolerance either. Simple, unremarkable neutrality, the way someone looks at a colleague, the way her entire family had never managed. The crack came on a cold Thursday afternoon when she traced the pivot point, the exact transaction, proving that Finn had been routing capital from the offshore account registered under her name into his own private portfolio. She called Laszlo over. He leaned above her shoulder to read the screen, close enough that she caught the scent of cedar and cold air, and when she walked him through the routing structure, his jaw tightened with a fury that had nothing to do with her. "They wanted me gone," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. He crouched in front of her chair so she couldn't look away. "Stop," he said. "Stop what?" "Folding yourself inward. You do it every time you say something that makes you feel exposed. You pull your arms across your stomach and try to disappear." His voice was very level. "Your family needed you to believe you were the problem so you'd stay quiet about the real one. You are not the problem. You are the only reason I have any of this." He gestured at the screen. "That's not charity. That's fact." Dahlia held very still. "They didn't sideline you because you weren't good enough," he said. "They sidelined you because you were better than all of them combined, and they knew it." She didn't cry. She had run out of tears for the Prentiss family sometime during the first week, but something in her chest released like pressure from a sealed line, quiet, fundamental, irreversible. "Okay," she said. He nodded, stood, and went back to his desk. That night, the estate lost power at 3 a.m. One moment the hallway lights were on, the next they weren't. Dahlia sat up in total darkness, listening to the silence rearrange itself, and then the sound arrived. A sharp crack from the direction of the east garden, followed by distant shouting. The door to her room opened before she could move. Laszlo was already in operational mode. Dark clothing, a sidearm she hadn't known he carried, his face stripped of everything ambient. He crossed the room in 4 strides and positioned himself between her and the window. "Are you hurt?" "No. What is this?" Someone breached the south perimeter with the security codes. He checked her face, then the window. Those codes are held by 6 people. One of them is the architect Howard's firm used for 16 years, the same man who designed this property for a previous owner before I acquired it. Dahlia understood immediately. He didn't just want the investigation to go away. He wanted the person who could prove it. Yes, beneath the control in Laszlo's voice was something that was not cold at all. He sent professionals. "We're moving." He guided her through the dark house by memory, one hand at her back. Below, his security team was already working. He brought her to a reinforced room off the west corridor, monitors, thick walls, a bolted door, and locked them in. On the surveillance screens, she watched it unfold in night vision green. 4 men in tactical gear moving through the ground floor. 3 of Laszlo's people, containing them in overlapping arcs. It was over in 11 minutes. When the radio crackled and his head of security confirmed the house was clear, Laszlo pressed the transmitter. "Hold the one we took alive," he said. "I'm coming down." Dahlia stood. "You stay here," he said. "No." It came out without hesitation. "If my father paid someone to put a bullet in me tonight, I want to be in the room when they say how much my life was worth to him." Laszlo looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression, not quite surprise, closer to recognition. "Stay behind me," he said, and opened the door. The man they'd taken alive was in the utility space below the garage, secured to a metal chair, a wound on his upper arm, the flat eyes of someone paid to be indifferent to outcomes. He was not indifferent by the time Laszlo finished with his questions. The contract had come from Finn Prentiss, not Howard. Howard had started to lose his nerve. Finn had not. The arrangement had been made through a broker the man declined to name until the second time Laszlo asked. The fee was $480,000, half on confirmation of contact, half on confirmation of death. Finn had pulled it from the same offshore account registered in Dahlia's name. Her brother had tried to have her killed with her own stolen money. Dahlia stood in the cold utility room and looked at the man in the chair and felt something very clear and very permanent settle inside her. Not rage, something quieter and more durable than rage. "I'm ready," she said. Laszlo turned, ready for what? To finish this. By dawn she was back at the terminal. Her hands were steady. Her mind was the clearest it had been in years. The offshore accounts registered under her name gave her legal access. She was the primary holder of record, however fraudulently installed. She moved methodically. First she built the evidence package. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every forged signature, the full chain connecting the LLCs to Howard's personal accounts, and from there to Finn's portfolio, and from there to the $480, zero-sooned, that had left the country 48 hours ago. She structured the documentation specifically for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She knew how they read files, what made a case airtight versus circumstantial. Then she initiated the transfers, every liquid asset in the offshore structures flowing back to Laszlo's holding accounts. The $4.2 million plus 3 weeks of accumulated costs, down to the last dollar. Then she set the dead man's switch. At 11 a.m. she looked up at Laszlo, who had been watching her work in silence for 4 hours. In 1 hour, the full evidence package goes to the FBI field office in Nashville, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Tennessee, she said. I also filed a separate complaint with the Tennessee Contractor Licensing Board. Howard's licenses will be suspended before he has time to liquidate anything. Laszlo was quiet for a moment. "Get dressed for a meeting," he said. "We're going to them." She wore the forest green blazer. Howard was in his downtown office when the elevator opened and Laszlo walked out, followed by two of his men and then Dahlia. Howard was mid-call. Finn was at the window with a coffee. Both turned. Both went pale in the same instant, though for different reasons. Howard because he had been expecting a visit you don't walk away from, and Finn because he had been expecting to never see his sister again at all. Dahlia walked past Laszlo and stopped in front of her father's desk. "I've been in your Cayman accounts," she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried. "I'm the managing member of record on all 3 Delaware LLCs, which means I had full legal access. Laszlo's organization has been repaid in full. The rest, your emergency reserves, Finn's startup capital, the liquid assets in the Brentwood hold, has been moved." Howard's face cycled through several expressions and landed on something close to begging. "Dahlia, you don't understand what you've done to us. We'll lose everything." "You tried to have me killed, Dad." She said it without anger, which was somehow worse. "Finn did, with money stolen from accounts in my name, arranged through a man who had access to security codes for a private property where I was sleeping. In about 35 minutes, an FBI agent is going to open an email. Every transaction I've just described will be in it, authenticated and sourced." Finn pushed off from the window. "You stupid." "Sit down." Laszlo's voice was quiet and absolute, and Finn sat. Howard's hands were shaking. Real shaking, the kind that comes from understanding that the worst thing has already happened and there is nothing left to prevent. "Please. You'll go down with us. Your name is on all of it." 30 days ago, Laszlo's legal team filed an affidavit of coercion with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Dahlia said. Full federal immunity for a cooperating witness who was placed into financial fraud under duress and threat of harm. "You gave them the entire narrative when you handed me over to a known criminal organization." She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. "You built the cover story yourself, Dad." "I just used it." Outside, somewhere on the street below, a siren started, then another. The red and blue of federal vehicles strobed off the glass face of the building across the avenue. Dahlia turned away from her father. She walked back to Laszlo, who offered his arm without ceremony. She took it. They left the Miller men to the absolute ruin they had engineered for themselves, and walked out into the cold Nashville morning without looking back. The drive back was quiet, but differently quiet than the first time. Dahlia sat with her hand resting in Laszlo's, not touching anything in the car anxiously, not bracing for impact. The radio broke into a news bulletin before they reached the highway. Federal agents had executed a search warrant on the offices of Prentiss Construction Group. 2 individuals were in custody. The anchor named charges: wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, sue. She listened until the segment ended, and the radio moved on to weather. That evening, back at the estate, Laszlo asked her to come to the office. He was standing at the window when she arrived, and there was a folder on the desk she had not seen before. "Before anything else," he said, "you need to understand how this started." She sat. He opened the folder. Inside was a forensic audit report she recognized immediately. She had written it herself, 14 months ago. A small logistics company out of Knoxville submitted to her by Howard as part of his due diligence on a potential acquisition. She had advised strongly against the deal, flagging massive irregularities in the company's offshore payment structures. Howard had dismissed her analysis as overcautious, proceeded anyway, and then quietly backed out. 6 weeks later, she had assumed he had finally read the numbers. Attached to her report was something she had never seen, a series of photographs. Her walking out of the coffee shop on Elliston Place she went to on Thursdays. Her at a table in the Nashville Public Library. Her in the parking lot outside the Vanderbilt alumni office. None of the images were threatening. They were simply observational. She looked up at Laszlo. "The logistics company your father tried to acquire was a subsidiary of one of my holding structures," he said. "When Howard submitted his due diligence, the forensic audit attached to it landed on my desk. I had 4 analysts review it before I was satisfied that whoever wrote it had genuinely traced something it took my own financial team months to obscure. He paused. I needed to know who had done it. Dahlia was very still. When I found out it was Howard Prentiss's daughter, the one he kept out of meetings, whose name he spoke with embarrassment, the one he'd spent years making invisible, I was angry, Laszlo said, and I was interested. I knew Howard's company was deteriorating. I knew the kind of man he was, the kind who, when pushed to the edge, looks around for someone smaller to throw over it first. He held her gaze. I extended the loan, knowing he would default. I knew he would come looking for a way out, and I knew what he would offer when he ran out of everything else. The structure of the past 3 weeks rearranged itself into perfect, terrible clarity. You didn't take me as collateral because he offered me, Dahlia said. You built the conditions for him to offer me. Yes. She sat with that for a long moment. The fire in the grate had burned down to low orange coals. Outside the windows, the first stars of the evening were visible above the tree line. A year ago, that admission would have frightened her. It might have felt like one more instance of a powerful man arranging her life without her consent. But she was sitting in a house where the closets had been stocked in her exact size before she arrived. Where Mrs. Aldana had learned by the second week that she took her coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and had simply started making it that way without comment. Where no one, in 3 weeks, had once looked at her body with the evaluative weariness she had spent her entire life anticipating. Where a man who could end conversations with his silence had crouched in front of her and told her that her family's cruelty had been deliberate and strategic, not accurate. You are a calculated, ruthless, dangerous man, she said. Yes, he agreed. And you manufactured the circumstances to get me out of that house. Yes. Silence. The fire settled. She watched his face, unreadable in the usual way, but she had learned over 3 weeks to read what lived at the edges of it. What happens now? She asked. Now I ask you to stay, Laszlo said. Not as collateral, not as an employee. He leaned forward slightly. I am moving a significant portion of my organization's capital into legitimate structures, real estate, private equity, asset management. I need someone who can build those structures from the inside and make them bulletproof. Someone who understands how fraud works because she's lived inside it, and who understands how the law works because she never stopped studying it. He paused. I want a partner, in every definition of that word, if you'll have me. Dahlia looked at him for a long time. She thought about the moment he had placed himself between her and an exposed window without being asked. She thought about the green jacket. She thought about every time he had said her name, not with distance, not with the absent quality her family had always used, as though her name were a minor inconvenience, but clearly, directly, like it was the specific thing he meant to say. She thought about the fact that she was, for the first time in her life, sitting exactly where she had chosen to be. I'll stay, she said, but we do this correctly. Legitimate structures, real compliance, documentation that would survive a congressional inquiry. No shortcuts. The corner of his mouth moved. Those are my terms exactly. Then we're in agreement. She stood, straightened the hem of the forest green blazer, and turned toward the desk. Show me the asset portfolio. I want to start with the Nashville properties. I know those markets. He stood as well, and the expression on his face was the closest thing to uncomplicated warmth she had yet seen from him. Yes, he said, you do. 2 years later, the Forensic Compliance Division of Prentiss Marin Capital was considered one of the most rigorous private financial operations in the Southeast. Dahlia ran it from an office in downtown Nashville, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a team of 12 who had learned very quickly that she did not accept vague sourcing or approximate numbers. Howard Prentiss was serving 12 years in federal prison. Finn was serving 9. The construction group had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to satisfy creditors whose names Howard had never bothered to learn. In the fall of the second year, the Tennessee Business Journal ran a full profile on Dahlia. The photographer arrived with an assistant and a mood board, and several polite suggestions about angles and posture and ways to minimize her silhouette in the frame. She thanked him for his time and stood the way she stood. The photo ran full page, and it ran the following week, and the week after that, it was the most shared feature the publication had produced in 4 years. Laszlo saw it before she did. He had it framed without telling her, and she found it one Tuesday morning hanging in the hallway outside their shared office, and she stopped in front of it and stood there for a moment. Not studying herself, exactly, but taking stock of the woman in the photograph, the set of her shoulders, the direct line of her gaze into the camera, the way she occupied the frame without apology. Laszlo appeared beside her eventually, coffee in hand, and looked at the photograph alongside her. "She looks like someone who knows exactly where she's going," he said. Dahlia considered that for a moment. "She does," she said. And she walked into the office, sat down at her desk, and got back to work.